Dust choked the sweltering Georgia air as the red and blue lights sliced through the twilight. A seasoned lawman thought he had hooked another easy catch on a lonely stretch of highway, a routine stop to feed his ego and line his pockets. He expected trembling hands. He expected total submission. Instead, as the tinted window of the gleaming black SUV finally rolled down, he found himself staring into the cold, unblinking eyes of the one man who could dismantle his entire corrupt empire with a single phone call. The heat in Faulkner County, Georgia, didn't just warm the skin, it suffocated the spirit. It was the kind of blistering, mid-August afternoon that made the asphalt shimmer with mirages and drove sensible folks indoors to hug their air conditioning units. But Sheriff Thomas Briggs was not a man who sought the comfort of the indoors when there was power to be wielded on the county lines. Briggs sat behind the wheel of his souped-up Dodge Charger cruiser, the engine idling with a low, menacing growl. The air conditioning was blasted on high, freezing the sweat on his forehead. Next to him sat his rookie partner, Deputy Kyle Harrison, a young man who was quickly learning that the law in Faulkner County wasn't dictated by the Constitution, but by the heavy-handed moods of Sheriff Briggs. For nearly 15 years, Briggs had run his jurisdiction like a medieval fiefdom. He was a large man with a thick neck, a flushed complexion, and a badge that had long ago lost its meaning, becoming instead a shield for his own extortionate rackets. Faulkner County was notorious for its aggressive policing. Out-of-state drivers, especially those who didn't fit Briggs's narrow view of respectable citizens, were routinely pulled over for fabricated infractions. Vehicles were searched, cash was seized under dubious civil asset forfeiture laws, and the local department's budget and Briggs's offshore accounts swelled. "Quiet day, boss," Harrison mumbled, staring out at the empty stretch of Route 9, a desolate two-lane highway flanked by endless walls of towering Georgia pines. "Quiet just means the rats are hiding, Kyle," Briggs replied, his voice a gravelly drawl. He took a sip from his iced tea, his eyes hidden behind dark, polarized aviators. "They always come out eventually. You just got to know how to spot 'em." Just as the words left his mouth, a shadow broke the shimmering horizon. It was a vehicle, a large, impeccably clean, pitch-black Chevrolet Suburban. Briggs sat up slightly, the leather of his seat creaking under his weight. He watched the SUV approach. It was traveling precisely at the speed limit, 55 miles per hour. But to Briggs, the vehicle practically screamed defiance. It had heavily tinted windows, so dark they were like obsidian mirrors reflecting the brutal southern sun. More importantly, it bore out-of-state plates. D.C. Plates. "Look at this high roller," Briggs sneered, a predatory grin stretching across his face. "Tints too dark? Probably pushing 56, 57. Reckless driving." Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sheriff, the radar says he's doing exactly 55. And DC plates? Could be government." "I don't care if it's the ghost of Abraham Lincoln," Briggs snapped, slamming his hand onto the gear shift. "In my county, nobody rolls through looking that arrogant without paying a toll. That vehicle reeks of out-of-town money. Probably some hotshot lawyer or a drug runner trying to look professional. Let's see how tough they are when they're staring down the barrel of Faulkner County justice." Briggs threw the Charger into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The cruiser's tires squealed against the hot asphalt, throwing up a cloud of white dust as he pulled out onto the highway, closing the distance between him and the black Suburban. Inside the cruiser, the siren wailed to life, a piercing shriek that shattered the afternoon silence, accompanied by the blinding flash of red and blue light bars. Briggs rode the bumper of the SUV, an aggressive intimidation tactic he had perfected over the years. Most drivers panicked, swerved, or slammed on their brakes, giving him legitimate probable cause for a reckless driving charge. But the driver of the Suburban did none of those things. The SUV's brake lights illuminated smoothly. The vehicle signaled right, decelerated with perfect control, and pulled over onto the wide gravel shoulder, coming to a gentle, precise stop. Briggs scoffed, slapping the steering wheel. "Thinks he's smart. Let's go, Kyle. Hand on your weapon. We don't know what kind of cartel trash is hiding behind that tint." The dust settled around the two vehicles. Briggs stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his duty belt to ensure the heavy handle of his Glock 17 was prominently displayed. He walked with a deliberate, rolling swagger, the walk of a man who owned the ground he stepped on. Deputy Harrison trailed a few paces behind, hand nervously resting on his holster, covering the passenger side of the SUV. As Briggs approached the driver's side of the Suburban, he tapped the tail light with his flashlight, a standard procedure leaving a fingerprint in case things went south. But Briggs did it hard enough to risk cracking the plastic, a subtle establishment of dominance. He stopped at the driver's window. Through the heavy tint, he could barely make out the silhouette of the driver. "Roll it down," Briggs barked, rapping his knuckles sharply against the reinforced glass. "All the way down. Now." With a soft electric hum, the heavy glass descended. The blast of icy, climate-controlled air that hit Briggs's face was a stark contrast to the oppressive Georgia heat. But what truly gave the sheriff a moment of pause was the man sitting behind the wheel. He was a black man in his late 50s, dressed impeccably in a crisp, dark navy suit with a subtle, expensive silk tie. His posture was perfectly straight, his hands resting at the 10 and 2 positions on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He didn't look angry. He didn't look terrified. He looked entirely, unsettlingly serene. His eyes, dark and sharp as cut flint, met Briggs's gaze without a flicker of intimidation. "Good afternoon, Deputy," the man said. His voice was deep, resonant, and completely devoid of the nervous tremor Briggs was so accustomed to hearing. "It's Sheriff," Briggs corrected sharply, puffing out his chest so his star badge caught the sunlight. "Sheriff Thomas Briggs, and you're a long way from home, boy. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Hand 'em over." The man did not flinch at the derogatory term. He simply maintained eye contact. "May I ask the reason for this traffic stop, Sheriff Briggs?" "You were swerving back there," Briggs lied smoothly, a rehearsed script rolling off his tongue. "Crossed the center line. Plus, that window tint is illegal in the state of Georgia. Now, are you going to hand over your documents? Or am I going to have to drag you out of this vehicle for resisting a lawful order?" The man slowly removed his left hand from the wheel, reaching into the breast pocket of his suit jacket. Briggs instinctively dropped his hand to his firearm, his thumb popping the retention strap. "Slowly," Briggs warned, his voice tight. "I am simply retrieving my identification, Sheriff," the man replied, his tone chillingly calm. He produced a slim leather wallet, extracting a standard driver's license and handing it through the window. Briggs snatched it. He glanced at the name. Aaron Fletcher. The address was listed in Virginia. "Aaron," Briggs said, deliberately using the first name to demean him. "What brings you down to Faulkner County? You lost? Because people who look like you, driving cars like this, usually have a very good reason to be passing through my town." "I am conducting business in the area," Aaron replied smoothly. "I assure you, Sheriff, my driving was exemplary. And this vehicle meets all federal and state regulations." "Federal regulations don't mean spit in my county," Briggs sneered, leaning closer to the window, invading Aaron's personal space. "I decide what's legal here, and right now I smell something funny." "You smell that, Kyle?" Briggs called out to his deputy over the roof of the SUV. "I don't smell anything, Sheriff," Harrison called back, his voice wavering. "Smells like marijuana to me," Briggs lied, his eyes locking back onto Aaron. The smell of marijuana was Briggs's golden ticket. It was the unprovable claim that gave him instant probable cause to tear a vehicle apart and seize whatever cash he found inside. "Step out of the vehicle, Aaron. Keep your hands where I can see them." For the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of Aaron Fletcher's mouth. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the cold, calculated smile of a grandmaster who had just watched his opponent step into a checkmate trap. "Sheriff Briggs," Aaron said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made the hairs on the back of Briggs's neck stand up. "I strongly advise you to reconsider this course of action. You have made a traffic stop without probable cause. You are now fabricating reasonable suspicion to initiate an illegal search. If you walk back to your cruiser right now, this ends as a minor footnote." Briggs's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. Nobody spoke to him like that. Not in Faulkner County. Not ever. "You listen to me, you arrogant son of a beat," Briggs snarled, drawing his weapon halfway from its holster. "Get out of the car before I pull you through this window." Aaron Fletcher calmly shifted the SUV into park. He unbuckled his seatbelt with deliberate slowness. "As you wish, Sheriff." The heavy door of the Suburban clicked open, and Aaron stepped out onto the gravel. He was taller than Briggs had anticipated, standing a formidable 6'2". He straightened his suit jacket, completely ignoring the fact that Briggs was hovering inches away, his hand gripping the butt of his sidearm. "Turn around and face the vehicle," Briggs ordered, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "I am not under arrest, Sheriff," Aaron stated firmly, not moving an inch. "And I will not be cuffed. You asked me to step out. I have complied. If you wish to search my vehicle based on your fabricated olfactory evidence, proceed. But know that you will be held accountable for every action you take from this second forward." Briggs hesitated for a fraction of a second. There was something deeply unnerving about this man. A normal person, especially a minority, stopped by a notorious sheriff on a deserted road, would be panicking. They would be pleading, angry, or terrified. Aaron Fletcher was none of these things. He was observing Briggs the way a scientist observes a volatile chemical reaction in a controlled laboratory. "Watch him, Kyle," Briggs barked, stepping away from Aaron and moving toward the rear of the SUV. "If he twitches, tase him." Harrison swallowed hard, raising his taser, though his hands were shaking. "Yes, sir." Briggs walked to the back of the Suburban. He reached for the handle of the rear tailgate. He expected to find duffel bags full of cartel cash. He expected to find illicit narcotics. He expected to find the justification he needed to seize the $100,000 vehicle and ruin the life of the man in the suit. "Last chance, Aaron," Briggs called out over his shoulder, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Anything in here I should know about?" "Oh, there is quite a lot in there you should know about, Sheriff," Aaron replied, his voice echoing slightly over the quiet hum of the highway. "But I think it is best you see it for yourself." Briggs yanked the handle. The heavy hydraulic liftgate hissed as it swung upward, revealing the cavernous rear compartment of the customized SUV. The blinding Georgia sunlight flooded the interior, and for a moment, Sheriff Thomas Briggs's brain simply stopped processing information. There were no duffel bags. There were no drugs. Instead, the back of the vehicle had been completely gutted and retrofitted. It was a state-of-the-art mobile command center. 4 massive high-definition monitors lined the reinforced walls, and on those monitors was a live, multi-angle video feed of the traffic stop. There was a camera on the dashboard, a camera hidden in the driver's side mirror, and one on the rear bumper. Audio waveforms danced on a laptop screen, indicating that every single word Briggs had just spoken, every lie, every threat, every fabricated claim of smelling marijuana had been recorded in crystal-clear, high-fidelity audio. But the screens weren't what made the blood freeze in Briggs's veins. Seated in the back of the SUV, surrounded by the glowing electronics, were 3 men. They were not wearing suits. They were wearing heavy, olive-drab tactical armor, Kevlar vests, helmets, and drop-leg holsters. Across the chest of each tactical vest, bold yellow letters spelled out a single, terrifying acronym. FBI. The man sitting in the center, a rugged, imposing agent named Frank Sullivan, slowly pulled off his headset. He looked down at the pale, wide-eyed sheriff with a look of absolute disgust. Sullivan reached beside him and picked up a thick, bound manila folder. He held it out toward the stunned sheriff. "Sheriff Thomas Briggs," Sullivan said, his voice hard as iron. "I'm Special Agent Frank Sullivan, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit." Briggs staggered backward, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. His jaw opened, but no sound came out. The swagger, the arrogance, the absolute power he had wielded just 3 minutes ago evaporated into the stifling summer air, replaced by a cold, suffocating terror. He turned his head slowly, looking back at the man in the navy suit. Aaron Fletcher was still standing, perfectly still, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Who? What is this?" Briggs stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wheeze. His hand fell away from his gun, his knees suddenly feeling like they were made of wet sand. Aaron Fletcher walked slowly toward the back of the vehicle, his polished leather shoes crunching methodically against the rocks. He stopped beside the open tailgate, looking down at the trembling sheriff. "You asked for my license and registration, Sheriff Briggs," Aaron said, reaching into his inner breast pocket once more. This time, he didn't pull out a leather wallet. He pulled out a flat, heavy credential case. He flipped it open, revealing a gleaming gold badge and a federal identification card. "Allow me to properly introduce myself," the man said, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "My name is Aaron Fletcher. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you, Sheriff, are the target of a 3-year federal probe into extortion, civil rights violations, and racketeering." Briggs felt the world tilt on its axis. The oppressive heat of the afternoon suddenly felt like a freezer. He looked at the glowing screens broadcasting his own illegal threats. He looked at the heavily armed federal agents sitting in the trunk. And he looked into the unforgiving eyes of the most powerful law enforcement officer in the United States. "You took the bait, Thomas," Director Fletcher whispered, stepping forward until he was inches from the sheriff's face. "And now your county belongs to me." The silence that descended upon Route 9 was absolute, deafening, and heavier than the sweltering Georgia humidity. The only sound was the low, rhythmic thrum of the idling Chevrolet Suburban and the erratic, shallow wheezing escaping Sheriff Thomas Briggs's throat. Director Aaron Fletcher did not blink. He stood with the immaculate poise of a man who had orchestrated this exact moment down to the millisecond. His gold FBI badge caught the harsh afternoon sun, casting a blinding reflection that seemed to burn directly into Briggs's retinas. For 15 years, Briggs had been the apex predator of Faulkner County. He had broken men in interrogation rooms, stolen life savings on the side of the highway, and laughed in the face of local judges who were too terrified or too bought off to stop him. He had operated under the assumption that he was untouchable. Now, staring at the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the nation, Briggs felt his entire world shrinking to the size of a jail cell. I don't understand," Briggs stammered, his thick fingers trembling so violently that they tapped against the leather of his duty belt. He took another step backward, his boots kicking up a small cloud of red dust. "Director? You're driving a civilian vehicle. This is entrapment. You can't just—" "Entrapment implies I coerced you into committing a crime you were not already predisposed to commit, Thomas," Director Fletcher interrupted, his voice smooth, cultured, and laced with absolute authority. I did not force you to pull me over without probable cause. I didn't force you to threaten to pull me through my window, and I certainly didn't force you to falsely claim you smelled narcotics as a pretext for an illegal search. You did all of that entirely on your own. It is muscle memory for you at this point, isn't it? Before Briggs could formulate a defense, Special Agent Frank Sullivan vaulted out of the back of the SUV. He was followed immediately by the two other heavily armed tactical agents. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision. In seconds, they had Briggs flanked. "Sheriff Thomas Briggs, keep your hands exactly where they are," Sullivan ordered, his hand resting firmly on his holstered weapon. "Do not move an inch. Do not even twitch." Briggs's eyes darted wildly, the panic finally breaching the dam of his arrogance. He looked past the federal agents, his desperate gaze finding his young partner, Deputy Kyle Harrison. Harrison was still standing by the passenger side of the cruiser, his taser lowered, his expression unreadable. "Kyle!" Briggs barked, his voice cracking, shedding any semblance of command. "Kyle, call dispatch! Get every unit out here! We have a situation on Route 9. These guys they're impersonating federal agents! Call it in!" Harrison did not move toward his radio. He did not reach for his gun. Instead, the young deputy slowly reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a small, black object, a digital audio transmitter, and deliberately unclipped it from his uniform. "Dispatch isn't going to answer, Sheriff," Harrison said. His voice, usually timid and deferential, was now calm, steady, and entirely foreign. Briggs stared at the transmitter in Harrison's hand, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. "Kyle, what are you doing? What is that?" Harrison reached up and peeled the Faulkner County Sheriff's patch off his shoulder, letting it flutter to the dusty asphalt. "My name isn't Kyle Harrison. It's Special Agent Kyle Reed, FBI Undercover Operations Division. And I haven't been calling dispatch for the last 6 months, Thomas. I've been calling Director Fletcher." The revelation struck Briggs like a physical blow to the chest. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to lean against the hot metal of his own cruiser to stay upright. The rookie he had taken under his wing, the kid he had been teaching how to skim cash off the top of drug busts, how to falsify police reports, how to intimidate witnesses. It had all been a lie. Every conversation in the cruiser, every illegal order he had given, every boast about his untouchable empire had been transmitted directly to Washington. "You wore a wire," Briggs whispered, his face draining of all color, leaving his skin a sickly, mottled gray. "For 6 months, you sat in my car. 1,400 hours of recorded audio, to be exact," Agent Reed replied, stepping forward to join his federal colleagues. "We have the dash cam footage of you stealing $40,000 from that landscaping crew from Florida last month. We have the audio of you threatening Mayor Hughes. We have the bank routing numbers for the offshore shell companies you set up in the Caymans. We have everything, Briggs." Director Fletcher stepped closer, invading Briggs's personal space, just as the corrupt sheriff had done to him mere minutes ago. But Fletcher didn't need to shout to project power. "For 3 years, your department has been a black hole for constitutional rights," Fletcher said, his dark eyes locking onto Briggs's terrified gaze. "You turned a badge into a license to steal. You targeted minorities, out-of-state plates, and the working class. You thought because you were a big fish in a small pond, the ocean wouldn't eventually swallow you." I can make a deal," Briggs pleaded, his voice dropping to a pathetic, desperate whisper. The bravado was entirely gone. He was sweating profusely, the dark stains spreading under the arms of his tan uniform shirt. "Director, listen to me. There are higher-ups, state politicians, judges. I can give you names. I can give you the whole network. Just don't do this here. Not on the side of the road." Fletcher's expression remained carved from stone. "We already have the network, Thomas. Thanks to you, and thanks to Agent Reed. We don't need your cooperation. We only need your surrender. Fletcher nodded to Agent Sullivan. Sullivan stepped forward and forcefully grabbed Briggs's right wrist, twisting it behind the sheriff's back. Briggs let out a sharp gasp of pain, but he didn't resist. He couldn't. His spirit had been entirely broken. Sullivan deftly unclipped Briggs's Glock 17 from his duty belt and tossed it to one of the tactical agents. The heavy, metallic click-clack of federal handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Briggs's wrists echoed across the desolate highway. "Thomas Briggs," Sullivan recited loudly, the Miranda warning sounding like a death knell in the humid air. "You are under arrest for violations of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1962, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, as well as multiple counts of extortion, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and conspiracy." As the cuffs locked, Briggs hung his head, his chin resting on his chest, staring at the dust on his boots. The predator had been caged, but the nightmare for Faulkner County's corrupt elite was only just beginning. Director Fletcher turned away from the defeated man. He reached into his suit jacket, pulling out an encrypted satellite radio. He pressed the transmit button. "This is Vanguard 1, Fletcher said calmly into the mic. "The primary target is secured. Operation Iron Sweep is a go. I repeat, Iron Sweep is a go. Burn it to the ground." For a fleeting second after Fletcher released the radio button, the Georgia highway remained quiet. Then the horizon seemed to shatter. From the dirt access roads hidden behind the dense tree lines, from the hidden turnoffs miles down the highway, and from the sky above, the full, terrifying might of the federal government descended upon Faulkner County. 3 matte black, heavily armored Bearcat tactical vehicles roared onto Route 9, their massive tires chewing up the asphalt as they surrounded Briggs's lonely cruiser. Overhead, the rhythmic, thunderous chopping of a Black Hawk helicopter cut through the stifling heat, its shadow passing directly over the handcuffed sheriff. Following the armor came a seemingly endless procession of unmarked black Suburbans, identical to the one Fletcher had been driving, their emergency lights strobing blindingly against the afternoon sun. Briggs was roughly spun around by Agent Sullivan and shoved against the side of his own cruiser. He was forced to watch as the convoy blew past them, heading straight for the heart of his town. "Watch closely, Thomas," Fletcher said, standing beside the road as the wind from the passing vehicles whipped his suit jacket. "That is the sound of your empire ending." 10 miles away, in the heart of the county seat, the Faulkner County Sheriff's Department was running as usual. The air conditioning was humming, deputies were drinking stale coffee, and Captain Roy Dempsey, Briggs's ruthlessly loyal second-in-command, was sitting in his office, counting a stack of crisp $100 bills seized from a routine traffic stop the night before. Dempsey was a lean, wiry man with a cruel smile and a profound lack of morality. He was currently trying to figure out how to fudge the evidence logs to make the $10,000 he was holding look like $2,000. Suddenly, his desk phone lit up. It was the private line, the emergency line. He snatched the receiver. "Dempsey?" "Roy, it's Judge Holloway!" The voice on the other end shrieked, laced with sheer panic. The feds are everywhere. They just kicked in the door to my chambers. They have warrants, Roy. Federal warrants." Dempsey's blood ran cold. He dropped the stack of cash. What are you talking about? Where is Briggs?" "I don't know," the judge screamed, before the line abruptly went dead, replaced by the dial tone. Dempsey shot out of his leather chair. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. If they had Holloway, they had the warrants, the wiretaps, the whole corrupt judicial pipeline. He lunged for his office door, locking the deadbolt, and immediately scrambled toward the heavy steel filing cabinet in the corner. Inside that cabinet was the burn book, 2 black leather ledgers detailing every illegal seizure, every bribe paid, and every politician bought over the last decade. If the feds found those ledgers, Dempsey wasn't just looking at jail time, he was looking at the rest of his natural life in a federal penitentiary. He grabbed a heavy metal trash can, threw the ledgers inside, and reached for the bottle of lighter fluid he kept for his cigars. He just needed 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes to turn the evidence to ash. Boom! The entire building shook. The sound of a breaching charge detonating at the precinct's front entrance echoed down the cinder-block hallways, followed immediately by the screams of deputies and the deafening, authoritative roar of federal agents. "FBI, get on the ground! Show me your hands! Nobody move!" Dempsey fumbled frantically with his lighter, his hands shaking so badly he dropped it onto the carpet. He cursed, dropping to his knees to search for it, the scent of lighter fluid filling his office. Before his fingers could grasp the plastic lighter, the reinforced wooden door to his office exploded inward. The deadbolt splintered the door frame, sending shards of wood flying across the room. Through the cloud of dust and smoke stepped Special Agent Rebecca Shaw. She was clad in full tactical gear, an M4 carbine raised and leveled directly at the space between Dempsey's eyes. A red laser dot painted itself onto his forehead. "Don't even breathe, Roy," Agent Shaw commanded, her voice slicing through the chaos like a razor blade. Behind her, 6 tactical agents flooded the room. Dempsey froze, still on his knees, his hands hovering inches above the lighter. He looked at the laser sight on his chest, then at the trash can full of ledgers dripping with lighter fluid. He slowly, agonizingly, raised his hands into the air. "Smart choice," Shaw muttered, stepping forward and kicking the trash can away. She glanced down at the soaked ledgers and smiled grimly. "Grab those, bag them. That's the crown jewel." Agents swarmed Dempsey, slamming him face first into his own mahogany desk. As they wrenched his arms behind his back, Dempsey turned his head, catching a glimpse of the bullpen outside his office. It was a massacre of authority. Every single corrupt deputy in Briggs's inner circle was on the ground, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. The federal agents were already moving with terrifying efficiency, securing the armory, taking control of the server rooms, and physically unspooling crime scene tape across the evidence lockers. "Where is Sheriff Briggs?" Dempsey spat, blood trickling from his lip where it had hit the desk. "He won't let you get away with this." Agent Shaw leaned down, her face inches from Dempsey's. "Sheriff Briggs is currently sitting in the back of a federal transport, crying like a child. Your kingdom is gone, Roy." Simultaneously, 3 miles away in an upscale, gated community, another FBI tactical team was dismantling the iron gates of Thomas Briggs's sprawling $2 million estate. Neighbors peeked out from behind drawn curtains in shock as federal agents flooded the perfectly manicured lawn. They used a battering ram to breach the custom oak front doors. Within 20 minutes, the house had been completely secured. In the master bedroom, behind a false wall in the walk-in closet, agents discovered a massive, floor-to-ceiling Mosler safe. When the FBI safecrackers finally drilled the locking mechanism and swung the heavy steel door open, even the seasoned agents had to pause in disbelief. Stacked inside were rows upon rows of shrink-wrapped $100 bills, totaling over $3 million in stolen cash. Beside the money were dozens of illegal, unregistered firearms, kilos of seized narcotics that had mysteriously vanished from the county evidence room, and external hard drives containing the digital blueprints of a massive extortion ring. Back on Route 9, the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, menacing shadows across the asphalt. Thomas Briggs sat in the rear of a heavily armored federal transport van, the harsh metallic interior offering no comfort. His hands were cuffed to a belly chain, and his ankles were shackled. The air conditioning in the van was freezing, but Briggs was drenched in cold sweat. The rear doors of the van opened, letting in a blast of the humid evening air. Director Aaron Fletcher stepped up, standing in the doorway, looking down at the broken man inside. "I thought you should know, Thomas," Fletcher said quietly. "We just secured your precinct. Captain Dempsey is in custody. We secured your estate. We found the safe in the closet. And our financial crimes division has just frozen 14 different offshore accounts linked to your shell companies. Briggs didn't look up. He couldn't. He just stared at the steel floor, grating, his breathing ragged. You built an empire on fear, Fletcher continued, his voice devoid of pity. You looked at that badge and saw a weapon to use against the vulnerable. You looked at me, a black man in an expensive car, and you saw a victim you could exploit because you thought the system would always protect you. But the system is exactly what is going to crush you. Briggs finally raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. What happens now? He croaked. Now? Fletcher said, stepping back and signaling for the agent to close the doors. Now, become exactly what you treated everyone else like today. A footnote. The heavy steel doors slammed shut, plunging Sheriff Thomas Briggs into total, suffocating darkness. The engine of the transport roared to life, and the van pulled away from the shoulder, leaving the dust to settle on Route 9, marking the end of the Predator's reign. The interrogation room, deep within the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in Atlanta, was designed to break men. It was a sterile, windowless box of reinforced concrete, painted a dull, headache-inducing beige, and chilled to a precise 62 degrees. There was no clock on the wall, stripping the occupant of their connection to the outside world. The only furniture was a heavy steel table bolted to the floor and 3 metal chairs. Sheriff Thomas Briggs had spent 48 hours in federal custody, and the transformation was profound. The swaggering, sun-burned tyrant of Route 9 was entirely gone. He sat hunched over the metal table, wearing an oversized, bright orange jumpsuit that swallowed his large frame. His hands, devoid of the heavy gold rings he used to wear, were clasped together, trembling slightly. The deep bags under his eyes spoke of 2 sleepless nights spent listening to the echoes of his crumbling empire. Beside him sat his attorney, Stephen Walsh, a high-priced criminal defense lawyer from Atlanta who charged $1,000 an hour. Walsh was meticulously groomed, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his briefcase open, exposing stacks of legal pads. Despite Walsh's confident posture, the tight set of his jaw betrayed the absolute hopelessness of their situation. The heavy steel door groaned open. Director Aaron Fletcher walked in, looking as immaculate as he had on the highway. He was no longer playing the part of a wealthy civilian. He wore the dark suit and stern demeanor of the nation's top federal cop. Behind him entered Diane Croft, the lead federal prosecutor for the Northern District of Georgia. She carried a thick, intimidatingly large binder, which she dropped onto the steel table with a resounding, echoing thud. "Good morning, Thomas," Fletcher said smoothly, pulling out a chair and sitting directly across from the disgraced sheriff. "I trust the accommodations are a stark contrast to your $2 million estate." Briggs didn't look up. He kept his eyes glued to the scuffed linoleum floor. Walsh cleared his throat, attempting to seize control of the room. "Director Fletcher, Miss Croft, we requested this proffer session to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. My client has served his community for over 2 decades. While there may have been administrative irregularities in how the Faulkner County Department operated, we are prepared to offer substantial cooperation in exchange for leniency." Diane Croft offered a smile that contained zero warmth. She flipped open the binder. "Mr. Walsh, I don't think you fully grasp the gravity of the room you are sitting in. We don't have administrative irregularities. We have a textbook RICO case. We have wire fraud, extortion, witness tampering, and civil rights violations under the color of law. Your client was caught on tape extorting an undercover FBI agent. We have the burn book from Captain Roy Dempsey's office. We have the $3 million in cash from the hidden safe. We do not need his cooperation. We already have the entire puzzle. Walsh leaned forward. You have his subordinates, but my client can give you the political umbrella. State Senator Richard Hayes. He shielded the department from state oversight in exchange for campaign contributions funneled through shell companies. My client will testify to that. But in return, we want the RICO charge dropped, and we want a recommendation of no more than 10 years in a minimum security facility. Briggs finally looked up, a spark of desperate, feral hope flickering in his bloodshot eyes. It was his ace in the hole. He had paid off Hayes for a decade. He was the golden goose. Fletcher stared at Briggs for a long, silent moment. The quiet in the room was suffocating. Then, Fletcher reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single photograph. He slid it across the cold metal table. Briggs leaned in. The breath hitched in his throat. It was a photograph of Senator Richard Hayes, wearing handcuffs, being escorted out of his Capitol Hill office by Special Agent Frank Sullivan. We arrested Senator Hayes at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Croft said coldly. He was indicted by a grand jury under seal a week ago. He actually started crying when Agent Sullivan put the cuffs on him. So as you can see, Mr. Walsh, your client has nothing of value left to trade. The political umbrella has already been collapsed. The feral spark in Briggs's eyes died, replaced by a hollow, bottomless void. His chest heaved as panic truly set in. How? Briggs whispered, his voice raspy and broken. How did you get all this? You can't build a RICO case, get a senator, get my bank records, and get my captain all from a 6-month wire on a rookie deputy. It's impossible. Director Fletcher leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. You are correct, Thomas. Agent Reed's undercover placement was merely the final nail in the coffin. The operation didn't begin 6 months ago. It began 3 years ago. But how? Briggs demanded, his voice cracking, the arrogance replaced by the agonizing need to understand how he had been outplayed. I kept everything tight. Nobody in my circle talked. Dempsey was loyal. Halloway was loyal. Who gave you the opening? Fletcher didn't smile, but a glint of profound satisfaction crossed his eyes. You built your entire world on the concept of loyalty, Thomas. But loyalty bought with fear and dirty money is a fragile thing. When the pressure is applied, it shatters. Croft reached into the binder and pulled out a digital audio player. She pressed a button. A voice crackled through the small speaker. He brings the cash in on Thursday nights, usually 40, sometimes 50,000. I run it through the dealership service department logs, make it look like cash repairs on fleet vehicles. Then I transfer it to the Cayman accounts on Monday mornings. He's crazy, man. He's completely out of control. If he finds out I'm talking to you, he'll kill me. The voice belonged to Paul Stanton, the owner of Faulkner County's largest auto dealership, the man who had laundered Briggs's stolen money for a decade. He was also Briggs's brother-in-law. Briggs sat frozen, the color completely draining from his face, leaving him a ghastly, pale white. Paul, he breathed, shaking his head in denial. No, Paul is family. He wouldn't. Paul was caught by the IRS 3.5 years ago for underreporting his own income, Fletcher explained, his tone clinical and unyielding. When they squeezed him, he panicked. He didn't just give us the money laundering operation, Thomas. He gave us the Cayman accounts. He gave us the names of the shell companies. He gave us Captain Dempsey. And he gave us Senator Hayes. Your own brother-in-law wore a wire to family barbecues. He copied your ledgers while you were drinking beer on his patio. The psychological weight of the revelation crashed down upon Briggs like a collapsing building. The paranoia he had fostered in others had secretly infected his own home. He had spent 3 years sitting across dining room tables, sharing meals, bragging about his untouchable empire to the very man who was methodically handing the FBI the rope to hang him. "Why do you think I was driving a brand new, fully loaded black Suburban on Route 9? Fletcher asked softly. Paul procured that vehicle for the Bureau. He knew exactly what kind of car you couldn't resist pulling over. He knew exactly what time you patrolled that stretch of highway. He set the bait, Thomas. I just drove the car." Briggs let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He buried his face in his large, trembling hands. The betrayal was total. There was no one left. His deputy was a ghost. His captain was in handcuffs. His political shield was shattered, and his own family had dug his grave. "Mr. Walsh," Croft said, closing the massive binder with a sharp snap that made Briggs flinch. "We are not here to negotiate a plea. We are here to offer an ultimatum. Your client will plead guilty to every single count on the indictment. He will waive his right to an appeal. He will forfeit the $3 million in cash, his estate, and his pension, which will be placed into a restitution fund for the innocent motorists he terrorized. In exchange, we will not seek the death penalty for the attempted murder conspiracy involving the witnesses he tried to silence in 2021. Walsh swallowed hard, turning to look at his broken client. "Thomas, you have to take this. They have you." Briggs slowly lowered his hands. Tears were streaming down his flushed cheeks, pooling in the deep wrinkles of his face. He looked at Director Fletcher, the man who had effortlessly dismantled his life without ever raising his voice. "I'm a dead man in a federal prison," Briggs whispered. "A cop. In Gen Pop. I won't last a year." "Then I suggest you request protective custody," Fletcher replied, standing up and straightening his jacket. "Though I imagine the isolation of a supermax cell will give you plenty of time to reflect on the people you put in cages for your own profit. We need a signature by 5 o'clock, Mr. Walsh. Otherwise we go to trial, and we will make sure the world sees every second of it." Fletcher turned and walked out of the interrogation room without a backward glance, leaving the predator to suffocate in his steel cage. 8 months later, the sky over Atlanta was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The federal courthouse stood as a towering monument of marble and glass, casting long, solemn shadows over the bustling city streets. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was dense and suffocatingly quiet. The gallery was packed to absolute capacity. But unlike most high-profile trials, the seats weren't filled with gawking onlookers or eager press. They were filled with the ghosts of Faulkner County. They were the working-class families whose life savings had been stolen on the side of Route 9 under the guise of civil asset forfeiture. They were the minority drivers who had been dragged from their cars, beaten and slapped with fabricated felony charges to justify the brutality. They were the mothers of young men who had spent years in state prison because Captain Dempsey had planted narcotics in their vehicles on Briggs's orders. At the defense table sat Thomas Briggs. He had lost 50 pounds. His hair had gone entirely white, and his skin hung loosely on his frame. He wore the standard-issue tan federal inmate uniform, his wrists shackled to a waist chain. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the polished wooden table in front of him, physically incapable of turning around to face the gallery of lives he had destroyed. The Honorable Margaret Cohen, a no-nonsense federal judge with a reputation for merciless sentencing in public corruption cases, sat high on the bench, looking down at the disgraced sheriff with an expression of profound disgust. "Thomas Briggs," Judge Cohen's voice echoed through the vast courtroom, sharp and commanding. "Over the past 3 days, I have listened to 72 victim impact statements. I have heard stories of unimaginable cruelty. You were entrusted with a badge, a solemn oath, to protect and serve the citizens of your county. Instead, you weaponized that badge. You operated not as a law enforcement officer, but as a cartel boss running an extortion racket, funded by the blood and terror of innocent people. Briggs closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking down his hollow cheek. You believed that because you wore a star, you were above the law. You believed that your victims had no voice, no power, and no recourse, Judge Cohen continued, her gavel resting heavily beneath her hand. But the law caught up to you, and today, the voices of those you silenced are the only ones that matter. In the very back row of the gallery, partially obscured by the shadows of the high archways, sat director Aaron Fletcher. He wore his signature navy suit, his posture perfectly straight. He did not come to gloat. He came to bear witness, to ensure that the promise he made on that sweltering Georgia highway had been fully kept. For the charges of racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations, extortion, wire fraud, and severe civil rights violations under the color of law, it is the judgment of this court that you, Thomas Briggs, be committed to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Judge Cohen declared, her voice rising in volume. The gallery held its collective breath. You are hereby sentenced to serve a term of life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will be transferred to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, where you will serve out the remainder of your natural days. Bang! The heavy wooden gavel struck the sound block. The sound was like a gunshot, signaling the absolute and final death of Thomas Briggs's reign. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief swept through the gallery. Some wept into the shoulders of their loved ones. Others simply stared at the back of Briggs's head, watching as the federal marshals grabbed him by the arms and hauled him to his feet. Briggs didn't struggle. He didn't look back. He simply shuffled forward, his chains rattling loudly against the wooden floorboards, the sound echoing a mournful dirge as he was led through the side door and into the dark corridors of the justice system. Fletcher watched the door close behind the former sheriff. He let out a slow, measured breath, stood up, and quietly slipped out of the courtroom before the press could swarm him. He walked out through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse, stepping into the warm Atlanta sunshine. The city air felt clean. Leaning against a black, unmarked government SUV parked at the curb was a young man in a sharp suit, sipping a coffee. It was Special Agent Kyle Reed, the man who had spent 6 grueling months riding shotgun in the belly of the beast. Reed looked up as Fletcher approached, tossing his empty coffee cup into a nearby bin. "It's done, Director?" "It's done, Kyle," Fletcher said, a rare, genuine smile touching his features. "Life without parole. Dempsey got 40 years. Holloway is looking at 20. The sweep is complete." Reed nodded, looking down at his polished shoes. "It feels strange. I spent so long pretending to be one of them, listening to the poison every single day. There were times I thought we'd never get enough to bring the whole house down. Evil is loud, Kyle. It boasts, it brags, and it believes it is invincible," Fletcher said, placing a reassuring hand on the young agent's shoulder. "But justice is quiet. It watches, it gathers, and when it finally strikes, it is absolute." Fletcher looked past the courthouse, toward the horizon where the sprawling pines of the Georgia countryside lay. "What happens to Faulkner County now, sir?" Reed asked. "The governor appointed a new interim sheriff this morning," Fletcher replied, opening the door to the SUV. "A good woman. 20 years in state patrol, spotless record. She's bringing in her own deputies, cleaning house. The asset forfeiture funds are being dispersed back to the victims starting next week. The town is breathing again." Reed smiled. "That's good to hear. Where to next, Director?" Fletcher climbed into the driver's seat of the black SUV, gripping the leather steering wheel. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror, his eyes dark, sharp, and resolute. There were always more predators out there. There were always more corrupt empires hiding in the shadows of the nation. "Back to work, Agent Reed," Fletcher said, starting the engine. Back to work. The black SUV pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the flowing city traffic, disappearing into the endless pursuit of the righteous path. The road to justice is often long and hidden in the shadows, but as Director Aaron Fletcher proved, absolute power will always crumble when confronted with absolute truth. Corruption may thrive in the dark, but it can never survive the blinding light of the law. If this thrilling story of justice, undercover bravery, and the ultimate downfall of a corrupt empire kept you on the edge of your seat, we need your support to bring more incredible tales to life. Please like this video, share it with your friends to spread the message, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping stories.